Welcome to In the Zone, brought to you by U.S. Construction Zone, bringing you strategies for success with construction innovators and change makers, including In the Zone peer-nominated national award winners. Here are your hosts, Jeremy and Valerie Owens.
We have a very special guest today, Valerie. Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas is a clinical psychologist, inspirational and award-winning international keynote speaker, and an impact entrepreneur, and that is hard to say, by the way. Known nationally and internationally as an innovator in social change, Sally has helped start up multiple large-scale gap-filling efforts in mental health, including the award-winning campaign Man Therapy, and the nation's first initiative for suicide prevention in construction called Construction Working Minds. And if that wasn't enough to fill her time, she also is a trainer, blogger, and podcaster. Please visit SallySpencerThomas.com to see her many accolades, awards, and credentials. My favorite was in 2016, she was invited speaker at the White House, where she presented on men's mental health. In a recent TEDx talk, she shares a goal to elevate the conversation to make mental health promotion and suicide prevention a health and safety priority in our schools, workplaces, and communities. Please help us welcome Sally Spencer-Thomas.
Yay.
Welcome, Sally. Hi.
Hi, I'm really thrilled to be here. This is a really important topic, so thanks for making it a priority for your show content.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. We just reading that, you must be very busy, so we appreciate you being here, and we'll get right to it.
Yeah, so Jeremy told me a little bit about you a while back, and I was telling him I have to meet her. Even if it's virtually, I have to meet her because not only what you've accomplished, but what you, I always look at it in terms of the impact you're making and the ripple effect of what your efforts now how they could impact the future. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Agreed.
So we're just going to jump right in. And I know this is a sensitive topic, so we will be very conscientious of that. But starting back at the beginning, why has suicide prevention become such a mission in your life?
Yeah, well, again, to your listeners too, it's a sensitive issue for them as well. And so if there are things that come up for them as they're listening to this, memories or feelings, and they need to reach out, please do so, because talking really helps. So I just wanted to kind of let people know we are going to be talking about a difficult topic today of suicide and mental health, and that's hard for a lot of families. For me, I was a clinical psychologist. I was interested in psychology because I'm interested in people and people's stories. Although when I got out of graduate school with $70,000 in debt, I realized, I wasn't meant to be a therapist. Oh dear, this is a problem. So I got into the work of leadership development, which was a much better fit. I was working with university students and really loving kind of helping them live their best lives and all of that. And just as I was really getting my feet on the ground with that new change in my career, my brother died by suicide. So December 7th, 2004, my younger brother, my only sibling, took his life after a pretty fierce and long battle with bipolar condition that ultimately proved to be fatal. And I know many people have these before and moment times in their life where this is my life before this happened and this is my life after. And that was what it was for me. His death became a huge calling for me.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I could see why that would be. Yeah, thank you for telling me that story. And I know that is, obviously not your first time telling that, and that is how you start a lot of your conversations, and that's what your TED Talk was also about, correct? Just the storytelling and how important that is. So we do appreciate you telling that again. Our second question is, we talked a little bit before in our previous meeting that you had another pivotal moment called the founding story, and I wanted you to tell that story as well, because I thought that was another pivotal moment for your starting here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, after Carson died, our family and his closest friends from across our lifespan got together and started to, first grieve together. We did a lot of crying, and then we did a lot of laughing because my brother was hilarious. And so we just started sharing stories of his life. And then we quickly resolved to doing bold gap filling from happening to other people, from what happened to Carson, from preventing that from happening to other people. And we realized there was this huge gap in the work. And that was that most people who died by suicide were working. They were working, or they were just working, or they had an immediate family member was working. So we started doing workplace suicide prevention as early as 2007, but we couldn't get any traction. Really, we got a little traction, but we thought it was going to be much bigger, but workplaces weren't ready. They were just like, oh, that's a medical thing. Like people need to take that stuff up with their doctors. So the founding story that you're wanting me to tell was really one of those game-changing conversations. It just so happened that in the fall of 2013, so you can see how much time is passing, right?
Yeah.
From 05 to 013, we're slogging this out and we can't really get it going anywhere. I was part of this networking group in Denver called Leadership Denver. A lot of cities have these programs where it kind of gives you a peek behind the curtain on what's going on in the city and tries to cultivate local leadership and so forth. And so I was part of this group, and I happened to meet another classmate of mine named John Kinning. And as you do in these networking groups, you go out for coffee. And so we went out for coffee one day, and he says, Sally, when you're talking about who's at risk for suicide, you're talking about my folks. And I said, I know. There's a perfect storm of risk factors in construction. And he said, well, I don't want to wait for another tragedy. As Workforce had experienced a suicide death in the years prior, he said, what do I need to do to get in front of this? And I really, really credit John, because at that time, 2013, really no one else was doing this work, especially in construction. And it's hard to be the first. It's something that's so daunting. People are like, oh, no, that's not a thing we do. And he's like, yeah, it's a thing I'm going to do. And let me be the first and let me try to get it right. So his company went and did what I call the full enchilada, which is many aspects of a comprehensive approach. Again, a lot of people dipping their toe in this, just do what they think is the check the box thing, or just like the easiest thing, whatever that is for them. Sometimes it's an awareness day. Sometimes it's just a training, but it's a one-off is basically what I'm saying. And he said, no, let's do it right. And so we're 3 months into this. And the full enchilada includes like a needs and strengths assessment and strategy really on how best practices in suicide prevention line up with the culture of the company. And it's a process, right? It takes time to go into this and develop the right components to it. And he's about 3 months in, he says, this is way too important for just my company. So again, takes another big step, which is how do I underwrite this and help you spread this nationally? Wow. So his company's, I know, right? So his company's philanthropic arm, their foundation, gave some money to help us create the first construction industry blueprint for suicide prevention. And, it's this little tiny 25-page PDF full of typos because I wrote it, but it was a thing, right? And we got it into the hands of the right people. And all of a sudden it was a document, right? Something that people could push against with some credentialed backing to it. And then another key partner in this, Cal Bayer, which I call him the connector energizer bunny. Like he knows everybody in the field. And he got the ears of a lot of trade publication editors. And he said, this is breaking news. And within a year, we were in 18 trade publications. And as they say, the rest is history. Because everybody had a story of being impacted by construction suicide death. They just didn't know this about each other. Right. And this thing made it legitimate.
Well, you find that common bond too. A lot of times in the suicide that gets a lot of awareness, such as police officers or firemen,
military.
We look at that, we look at their career as the definer or defining piece. However, in construction, I think generally we don't look for that link. We don't say, oh, well, these were the men in construction. We say, oh, well, he was father and he was stressed or he had mental illness, so we don't find that common link, and so it gets overlooked or miscategorized.
Yeah, and for construction, I think you said it before that it didn't get reporting that it needed to early on. Like the problem's always been there, right? But if you're not going to report about it and talk about it, then it's not really there. I mean, that's the weird thing about it's gaining steam and traction now because I think we're more willing to have the conversations and because the statistics are more out in the open. But when I was growing up in construction, and my parents and my grandfather, not a peep. I've never heard of it. Mm-hmm. Never once heard of it.
Yeah, so data thing is interesting because you're right. It always existed there, but a couple of things. One is, the construction industry looks to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to help them track mortality and morbidity around safety. Well, largely suicide deaths is not happening on a job site. Right. So the data wasn't getting captured in the place that everybody was looking. Most people die at home or in some other place.
Gotcha.
It's not that they don't die on the job site, and that number's been, increasing year after year, but it's a small number when you compare it to other things.
Sure.
The other issue of why the data was difficult is because construction is largely a transitory workforce. So they do a job, they move on. They do a job, they move on. And so that tracking also wasn't happening because people were moving around. So it wasn't until the CDC started going into the death data, which is coded by last occupation, where they went, whoa, wait a minute.
Oh.
And all the male-dominated industries are on the top 10 list because it's men who die by suicide more than women.
Right.
But even within that, construction is very consistently number one or number two. So there's something additionally happening within construction that increases risk.
Right.
What types of statistics are you seeing, and how have they changed over time?
Really, to be honest, we just started looking at this data within industry as early as 2016. So the trend data isn't quite strong enough yet to say, this is what we're seeing. And again, it's been construction number one or number two throughout. Within that, now we're just starting to get a little bit more sophistication within different types of trades. And there is some clear indication. There's things, the iron workers, astronomical rates. But people always ask too, is it just the laborers? And it's not. The managers are also up there. So there's a lot of contributions, risk factors and so forth that are making all kinds of folks who work in construction at risk. I would just say the other trend that we are paying attention to is that everybody thought that during the pandemic, the suicide rates were going to skyrocket. And so we were very focused by January of 2021, did that happen? And it didn't. So, it didn't with some caveats. It didn't overall. And another report just came out in the last couple of weeks that said it actually went down 3 to 5% overall. But within that, communities of color have higher rates of suicide overall. And that decrease in suicide was offset by an increase in overdose and accidental death, which is largely gray area, right?
How do you report something, right?
Right. So if you didn't have the time to do a full investigation on those deaths because you were busy doing death reporting on COVID, right, you're not going to peel the layer back and look at what we call a psychological autopsy about intent. Right. So lots of complications with the data, but that's just one piece I know people were hungry for the answer for.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about it earlier with the man's man industry. I know that trend is changing, as we kind of get older as an industry as well. So we're older, we're still male dominated, we're still, quote unquote tough guys. I'm not, but in general that's there. So I guess the not the willingness to talk to people about it. And then the other thing that we talked about earlier that I wanted you to talk about is injury, and how just getting injured puts you on the wrong track.
Yeah, so you started to lift off some of those perfect storms of risk factors that we find in construction, and one of the more unique ones, not completely unique, but is the fact that the work is dependent on the labor of your body. So there's a high risk for injury, potential disability, and pain, and all of those things contribute to suicide risk. So pain is the definition of misery. And if it's long-term, really difficult pain issues, that can also lead to the prescription of opiates, which can lead to a whole other can of worms in terms of people's well-being. And then if it results in a disability, if the injury or chronic injury leads to them not being able to do the work anymore, well, now you've got someone who was providing for their family, living into dreams that they had, and all of a sudden they can't work in the way that they were before, and the fall seems so great, and that could happen also from a layoff or a furlough, that I used to be provider, I used to have value, and now I'm not doing that, really weighs heavy on this industry where people can make a really good living with high school diploma, technical degree, in places where that's not always possible for them. So that fall seems so great piece is also part of this picture.
Yeah, and we talked about it too, that money's a factor, like almost always it is, right?
Right.
Where you start making money, right? We see it in our industry all the time. You start making money, you go buy that giant truck, and then with the giant truck comes something that you need to tow it with. You need to tow the boat or something else. So toys and things have always been part of our industry and maybe our identity. So that's a factor as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. So this is a really important part of the conversation because too much of the narrative around suicide is around mental health. And it's not to say that mental health doesn't play a role. I already mentioned my brother had bipolar condition. It definitely plays a role, but it's not the whole story. There are also other contributors that are not related to mental health, and a big one is financial disruption. So as you described, a lot of people, especially early on in their career, get way, as we say in Colorado, way over their skis in terms of their commitments to debt. Because they're excited, like finally they can live into some of these dreams they have, but they don't have the financial management skills or the ability to forecast that 6 months from now we're going to have a recession and everybody's getting laid off.
Right.
And so it's that debt that now they are chained, like handcuffed to a job that's really difficult, and now we have to work even more hours and longer years to pay off debt for a lifestyle they can no longer afford and now have no time to enjoy. And that feeling of being trapped is very, very difficult for people.
Yeah, we've talked about this on other with other podcast guests about construction professionals are really good at solving problems. Like that's our job title. Like we're multitaskers. We have to switch, solve this problem, switch, get another call. We got to do this problem. So there is a tendency to be good at it, and then at the same time also want to fix it yourself. And I'm guilty of that as well. Like same with Valerie. Like I just want to fix it. Let me get in there and get my hands in there and fix it. I think, but that's part of the problem with us too, is that we're so used to fixing it and being rewarded for that when we can't fix it, we probably don't tell anybody about it.
Yeah, spot on. So it's that superpower that has an underbelly, right? Like all of our superpowers, we got a dark side to it and a shadow, if you will. And this is what we also say. And it's also what I love about working with construction, because I'm like, hey, girly do-gooder here says you have a problem. And people say, oh yeah, what is it? And I say, here's the data. They're like, oh gosh, right into, and now what do we do? Like, I don't have to do a bunch of song and dance. We're like, this is really important. You can save lives. They're like, got it. We got a problem. What do we do? I'm like, I love you. This is great. Not a lot of that. But then when it comes to like what actually needs to be done, it's most definitely a feeling of writing with a non-dominant hand, because it's about not solving problems. It's about listening and showing up with empathy and compassion. That might take a while, and that's like, whoa, that's really frustrating for people. Or it's about, learning things around emotional intelligence, which may or not have been part of kind of the lexicon or the skills that you bring to the table. So, but what I have found is that the reward is so great, when individuals and teams and companies and job sites lean into this, like, wow, right away they're out there practicing and they're having tremendous impact. So for me, every day when I get up in front of a construction audience, I get goosebumps, because I know even if 1/3 of you take me on and try these new skills, you're going to have an immediate impact. Yeah. And it's so cool to see. Yeah.
So that's what I was going to ask. You and John got together and you built this community and lots of resources that were available. I was going to ask, how has that now developed into you're going out and speaking to these groups? What types of things are you offering them?
Yeah. So this is a social movement at this point, and like other movements, like it starts in pockets where people are noticing things, and then over time we start to get connected and learn from each other, and then we get organized, and then other like infrastructure things start to be built. So it's really crediting, again, John and Cal and the early adopters of the world to get this moving, and it's moved very quickly. So I just also want to mention that the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention is the place where people got organized. Like they started to connect, share best practices, empower one another. Super exciting. So what is this translated into? So like any change thing, we've first got to get it on the radar, right? So like you said, Jeremy, like I didn't even know this was an issue. That's true right now still for probably 90% of construction companies, because a lot of them are littles, right? They're little mom and pops. They've got their head down, just trying to survive the day.
Right.
And they're not aware of this yet. The bigger ones are, and a lot of the unions are, a lot of the professional associations are. And so it's starting to trickle, but still like 90% are like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
got to get it on the radar first.
Mhm.
Once we got it on the radar, so that has taken a couple years to
Yeah.
create a critical mass around that. Now we've got action. Right? And so what does that look like? And usually the first passive action is, how do I help this person right here, right now? So
Mhm.
we're giving them skills on how to help the immediate situation with people they're worried about. How do you notice? How do you start a conversation? How do you vet your resources so you know that warm handoff's going well? That kind of stuff. And then it's, what else do we do? Because we got to get upstream from the moment of crisis, and we really got to work on changing culture, getting managers to be more proactive in these conversations and how to deal with it when there's a performance issue. We've got to build out the whole comprehensive approach, not just, although it's important, not just how to help somebody in the moment of crisis.
Right. Yeah.
How crazy is that you're involved in the very first document? Like, talk about ground floor with this thing, right? The very first document in the whole industry, you had your fingerprints on it, even with typos. Even with typos. That to see it grow from what it was to what it is now, it must be super rewarding, and what a great honor for your brother, right? Like, just
It's so wild. And absolutely, I feel like he walks with me and opens doors and kicks me in the butt from time to time. I definitely believe that. But, like I said, I'm a girly do-gooder. So every time I'm in front of this, large audience of what's mostly like really rugged, tough guys and women, I'm like, how the heck did I get here? And then I'm like, I can't imagine myself anywhere else. Like, this is exactly the place I need to be for the biggest impact. And so I just love it. And I've loved learning so much about construction. I have such deep respect. Like I have also done in working with military and first responders. I mean, these are worlds that I don't really know very intimately, but I know them much better today, and I have tremendous respect.
awesome.
Amazing. Can I ask too, just in getting to know you better and what you were doing, was your brother involved in the construction industry, or did that kind of evolve out of, you said there's the before and the after, which I know so well. And
No,
so,
my brother was in the insurance industry, but not with companies, in more healthcare insurance kinds of work. The before and after with construction was really John Kinney, where
okay.
he was like, it's my people. And I said, all right, well, let's do the thing. Let's go. Before that, we didn't have the CDC data. We knew male-dominated industries were going to be more impacted because it's men who die. And I'm going to just make that clear. It's men who die, but women attempt at higher rates than men. So
Right.
women's industry, women and gender neutral industries are also impacted, but suicide attempt data is just less clear and it's less reported than suicide death data. So that's why male dominated industries are starting this. But I'm seeing 5-10 years from now, it'll be much more widespread because we'll have
Right.
better surveillance efforts around attempts, and people will realize, oh my goodness, it's everybody's
Yes.
workforce. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and I know it's kind of like a little bit of a gray area with the, access to handguns as well. Obviously when you're in military, where you're in police and fire, and then construction's kind of a little bit behind there where, they're hunters, they typically have self-defense, guns in the home, and that has to do a little bit with the data with men too, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the death data, it's very clear half of the deaths are by firearm. And this is a very challenging conversation in our country. There's a lot of very passionate firearm owners who, get their hackles up when we hear like, wait, you're going to mess with my guns. No way. But again, when we come alongside people and say nobody wants their people to die by suicide, and how do we make this a collaborative and respectful conversation to keep people safe when they're at risk? How do we involve the firearm retailers and the firearm safety instructors as collaborative partners in this effort to reduce suicide? Now we've got a different story going. And then even more encouraging for boots on the ground in construction, the data coming out now, the emerging data says that firearm owning peers are far more impactful in negotiating some kind of arrangement where we can just create a gap in time. That's all we're trying to do. Create a gap in time between a person and the thing that they can use to kill themselves, which is mostly guns. It's also medication, but it's mostly guns. Peers are far better able to do that than mental health professionals. So we got to get peers up to speed so they know how to manage that and what to say and kind of how to negotiate that, again, in a very collaborative and respectful way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So you're working, the majority of the people that we work with, as well as you, are construction professionals. What are some of the things that they can do or implement in their industry or in their business themselves that can help with suicide prevention?
Yeah, so I always start off with listen first. And with a bunch of problem solvers and decisive
Yeah.
decision makers, that's a little bit of a hard sell, but I always push it for a number of reasons. Number one, this is a learning curve for everybody. And if you don't spend time listening and just jump into the solution, the chances are good that it's going to A, be a mismatch, and B, rejected. So listen first. And there's ways you can create safe space for conversations around this on the front end, whether that's an anonymous survey or small focus groups or interviews. Listen to your people. They will tell you, here's where we're strong. Here's what helps us get through every day. We love the work, or we love our managers, or whatever it is. And then here's where we have problems. Like, here's where it's really stressful. And it could be around psychological safety, or it could be, the level of travel, or the lack of clarity in roles, or whatever it is. They're going to tell you where the pain points are. Then you meet the two. You say, here's, we have national guidelines now, national guidelines for workplace suicide prevention. There's 9 practices. Action step: go take the pledge, make suicide prevention a health and safety priority in your workplace, at workplacesuicideprevention.com. And then there's 9 practices, like upstream, midstream, and downstream: prevention, intervention, and crisis response, that people can start to match these things together. Here's what the people said. Here's the 9 things we could do. Let's match them. So depending on how that comes out, for example, if there has been a recent suicide death, you're not going to want to jump into a training that says, here's all the things you should have seen, and here's what you should have said.
Right.
It will create tremendous amounts of survivor guilt. So instead, you're going to want to start with what we call postvention, which is what we do after a suicide crisis. We address trauma and grief. First and foremost, we address the fact that we lost a family member. Basically, we lost a community member here, and this impacts people greatly. And then, with really intention, we slowly transition into more prevention work. So there's all kinds of decisions to be made once we know the story internally.
Yes.
And then throughout that process also, not only to get buy-in and get information about where to start, you get baseline data, right? So then you can also start to benchmark change over time. Like, nobody knew the resources when we start this. Now 80% of the people can say, I know what the crisis text line is. I know what the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is. And they're much more likely to use those resources. So you can then go back and say, this was a good investment, because now we can track, not only knowledge, we can track behavior change, we can track retention, sick days. All of these things are connected when people are feeling overwhelmed and despairing. So we can start to make a real return on investment to the company.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of my least favorite words is the word stigma, and I feel like it's getting better. Like, maybe there's less of a stigma, but since your brother's passing in 2004, do you feel like the stigma around mental health disease is changing, improving? What do you feel? I mean, you obviously have your fingerprints all over this and time spent. What do you feel is going on here?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting topic for me as well, because after Carson died, we made a little baby nonprofit in his memory, and we just started doing a little work. And our tagline was, the Carson J. Spencer Foundation, removing the stigma of mental illness, because I really do believe that it was the pain around the shame of what he was experiencing that was even more life-threatening than the illness itself, right? So we make all these business cards. We're just starting to get our little baby thing off the ground, and I wanted to invite this speaker to Colorado who had made a big impact on me, and so she's a well-renowned professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins. Like, she's a rock star in my world. And so I go to pick her up, and she's also someone who lives with bipolar condition herself and writes beautifully about it, Kay Redfield Jameson. I go to pick her up at the airport, and I feel like I'm meeting Bono. I'm like so starstruck. And she gets in the car with me. I'm like, oh, Dr. Jameson, how do we remove the stigma of mental illness? And she goes, oh, but what? She said, okay, starters, stop using that word. And I went, oh no, 1,500 business cards. Oh no. But as soon as she said it, I knew it was true, because our brains are hardwired to remember the negative things. And so the entire mental health community globally is just obsessed with stigma everywhere. Right. And the more we talk about it, the more we just are reinforcing that connection. Yes. The research around and I would actually reframe stigma, because it's an undetermined word. It means different things to different people, and say what it actually is prejudice and discrimination. That's actually what it is. We hold these biases and then we act differently to people we perceive are having this condition, just like we would with racial discrimination or other forms of discrimination. And that's where we need to tackle this issue. And like all marginalized experiences, it's not data that gets rid of it, right? It's our human contact. And when we look at the research that is coming out of research labs by like Patrick Corrigan and so forth, he found that just increasing awareness didn't do the trick. Like in the moment, we call it the state trooper effect. Like in the moment you're in front of it, you're like, whoa, what's that? And you're paying attention. But as soon as it's in the rear view mirror, we all go back to what we were doing before. And it's not like a call out shaming kind of approach. That just makes people everywhere duck, right? And they just hide. And that makes people scared to have these important conversations. What actually changes and reduces bias is people getting with people and having conversations, real storytelling, connecting on a very human level, realizing we have far more in common than we have differences. And for people to see, oh, it's Joe. Joe's experiencing this. I love Joe. Well, now I gotta up my game, because if Joe's going through this, I need to be there for him, or whatever. People just kind of see it in a different light. So that's where I see the traction starting to come, is because more and more people are coming out proud. It's taken a while, and I'm always on the hunt for the really great storyteller in construction, because they've been a little slow, and I get it. It's scary, and discrimination is a real thing. But the military's been at it for a while, right? The military's been cultivating storytellers. We're starting to see that. First responders been cultivating storytellers. Now it's our turn to cultivate storytellers within construction.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is how how important it is for the testimonies of people who are, been there and doing that. How important it is for them to come forward. Is there the people who you find who are honest with you and able to share their stories? Do you find oftentimes that they're reluctant to share them with others at risk of, because of, their business, or just the fear of revealing, such a vulnerable part of yourself?
Yeah. So interestingly, again, the research will show that people who authentically disclose are actually seen as very strong, but we are afraid to reveal our secrets. And I get it. I totally get it. And I would say that, the construction storytelling effort has started largely with bereavement stories, which is an easier story to tell, like mine, where I lost somebody and I've been impacted. It's harder to tell the story of a lived experience with suicidal intensity. Like I had suicidal thoughts, or I lived through a suicide attempt. But they're coming, right? And it just takes one. It just takes one, and you don't even have to share the whole enchilada. Like you don't have to tell the whole story with all the details. In fact, it's not necessary. What's most important is what we call the hero's journey through it. So I had this downward spiral experience, whatever it was, financial, in my relationship, with an addiction, with trauma, with depression. And it landed me in this really dark place. But here was my turning point. Right. And in that turning point, in that moment, I knew I had to do something differently. And then the upward and outward is where we focus. So the upward and outward, and it varies, right? For some people, it's a spiritual awakening. For some people, they got sober. For some people, they got into the right form of support, whether that was peer support or professional mental health services. Some people get a dog that is an animal assisted, like lifesaver for them. People have different pathways out of that. I don't really care. If you got it, if you out and you got something to help you through that, that's the hero's journey. And at the end of the storytelling, we have people reflect back. What do they have today that they wouldn't have had they not going through what we call a crucible experience, a transformational experience? And so they say things like, I have a deeper connection to my creator, or I have much more appreciation for my family members, or whatever. They have all kinds of insights. And so when you focus on the story from that kind of framework, people have a sense of pride. I survived something. Something. But it takes a while to get the courage to do that. And then, like I said, we just need one very effective storyteller, and people go, yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Who hasn't been brought to their knees by an overwhelming life experience and found it hard to white knuckle it through. Almost everybody has had that experience. And so once we find that we have this stuff in common, now we can stand in solidarity with each other, and then get to this place where I've got your back. I got your back. We'll just take turns here. And when it's my turn, I hope you're there for me, because I got to be there for you. And that's how we're going to do it.
Exactly.
So it becomes much more normal and validated.
Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. And this next one is for both of you. In thinking about this podcast with both of you having gone through similar experiences, I wanted to ask this for both of you. This is something that I personally have struggled with. Is for those who are fortunate enough to have not lost someone that close, what advice do you have for them to best support those in the midst of grief? Because I think for me personally, having gone through this and watching my favorite person struggle, there's no playbook. And even if there's a playbook, you're going to mess it up every day in so many different ways. But I think that if more people understood how to support, it would really help because, like I said, it was such a learning experience that I want others to know and learn on the grieving side as well.
Mm.
Yeah, well, first I just want to share, I'm sorry that we have this shared experience, and I'm also very grateful that we're here talking about it together,
Yeah,
Agreed.
me too.
because it makes a difference when we can open those doors. So
Hmm.
I'm glad to be here with you to kind of figure out how we can change things together. Um, for me, it was complicated in a lot of ways. First of all, I'm a mental health provider, right? This stuff doesn't happen to us, the helpers.
Hmm.
And this is a whole nother narrative that complicates the clinical world that I try to support. Because again, there's so much shame. Like I should have, I could have, I knew things, I had tools, that we have failed.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. How about you, Valerie? What was some of the pieces that you have faced?
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel the same. In my situation, I lost my brother almost 2 years ago to suicide, and similar in that, he was my best friend. And so a lot of the guilt that you feel um, cannot be soothed. I've learned by getting my own help that, you can't save anyone by loving them enough, but there are things to look out for. And I am proud that I was very straightforward with my brother in asking him, are you considering suicide? And so we did have conversations, and I know that there was nothing else I could do. I'm fortunate in that aspect, but still as human beings and being closest, you still do wonder, was there something, or if only I'd done that, or, that type of thing. But I think that, one of the things that sticks out for me is one, what you said in the, as we begun this question, was just the acknowledgement of that you're not alone. You're in Denver and we're here in Folsom, and we're apart, but there is a common shared bond that you forever have with others who have lost someone. So I think having those resources available, even though it sounds funny to label it under resource, but the resource of just understanding that there's a community out there who understands, and every story is different, but that there are other people out there who are willing and able to listen to you and know what you're going through. You're not alone. But then also, the people who have not gone through it, I think there's so many, just being willing to, we say it often, I'm sure you do, in mental health, is don't be afraid to talk about them, say their names and tell stories. And I was just reading something yesterday that was just so beautiful, and it was saying, something to the effect of, you can't, by bringing them up, you bring so much joy to me. I crave when people say, hey, I was thinking about your brother today, or, that
Oh,
type
yeah.
of thing where you just go like, oh, really? Because I think about him 24/7. He's always there, and so even though the sadness is always there, at least you have, it's just somebody else that remembers. They existed, they were there. And I love also, sorry, I keep going on, but you were talking about the hero's journey, and the beginning with some stories will begin with the bereavement. And I loved when you said that, because I think that we often feel that if we haven't experienced the mental health issue, or if we haven't experienced the stress of being the financial provider, whatever, it may be, whatever that variable may be, the bereavement itself is what can empower this group and open the door to who knows how many other people. I love that you use statistics to watch that growth, and you're able to, quantitatively look at how much you've progressed and how much we're moving forward in this topic.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
so all that to say.
That was great.
Open that can of worms.
That's great. No, I appreciate you guys sharing that. And Sally, I appreciate you being here. I know it's, like I said, I know your schedule is very busy, and we wanted to make sure Valerie could be here for this one especially. And so we appreciate the late afternoon, early evening session here. And we'd like to finish with just kind of getting to know you just a little bit more outside of your work. So we asked a couple questions that's called the Zone Out feature. And our first one, and maybe you answered this earlier, but as a child, what did you actually want to be when you grew up?
Well, I actually had dreams when I was very young of being a professional figure skater. So it was a long time ago. It was the era of Dorothy Hamill and many other really exciting skaters. And so I went out there to try, but I didn't have the athletic prowess to succeed. But to this day, my favorite dreams, I'm skating. Like, it's kind of dancing and flying at the same time, and it's magical to me. So yeah, some kind of really awesome figure skater. That was a dream.
I love that.
Very cool.
So, okay, you have your own late night talk show. Who would you want to be your guest?
Yeah, hands down, Brene Brown. Brene Brown, I think, has really shifted the conversation on shame and guilt and vulnerability. I just love how she speaks about it. She knows the research inside out, and she's super funny. So she's been able to really reach a lot of people in understanding how trust is built, how we recover from things by really having the courage to disclose and share with one another. That's how we grow. Love her.
Awesome. I've heard that name from Valerie before. All right, and the last one, who is the most influential person in your life?
All right, well, I'm going to have to say it's 3, and those would be my children. So I want to be the mom that they're proud of always, and they're Gen Zers. So let me share with you the level of expectation, hard to meet. Just one example, they're understandably fired up about climate change, and my middle son doesn't wear shoes, which everyone thinks is weird, but he's making a statement of, we all put our footprint on this world. How are you doing this responsibly? And I'm like, dude, I can't even come close to the commitment you're making to this on a personal level. I can't even pretend to. Like, you hold up such a high expectation and standard for doing ethical things and holding other people accountable for it. I'm going to try my best. But yeah, those are the ones. They influence me every day. Well,
you're leaving a lasting legacy for your kids, no doubt about it. And now you're leaving a lasting legacy for the construction industry as well. So we do severely appreciate what you're doing, and just keep it up. Just let us know how we can support you. If you have events or things coming up, just let us know. And I know that SallySpencerThomas.com is the way to find you. Is there any other ways to get in touch with you?
Sure. I would actually drive people to constructionworkingminds.com, because that's a little bit more construction specific. There's a bunch of stuff on my site that people might not find relevant, but Construction Working Minds is a go-to place that has tools and case studies and examples. And, I'm a person who wants a training. Where do I start? That kind of thing. So that's a good place to start. And I'll just put it out there, because, right, you put intentions out and then they manifest, right?
Yeah.
So our goal in 2022, around the time of Safety Week, probably later that May, is to have the first ever Construction Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Summit here in Colorado. Ooh. So, right, I'm going to put that out there. We're going to make that happen because we're in that place now in our evolution where we need to share information. We need to envision a strategy over the next 5 years and how we're going to make this even more impactful over time. So I'm super excited. So everybody check back in. It's looking good. I'll just say that. Awesome. We don't have a date yet
send an invite our way.
Yes,
just have her speak. She's
I love that you're doing this. I think that, oftentimes, and this from experience, that when you've suffered such a loss, there is the before and after. And after, there comes eventually a time, I think, in most people's lives where it's like you feel the fire burning, and it's like I have to take this story and make something beautiful of it. you know?
Yeah, you both are doing that.
Something
So,
beautiful of
yeah,
the ashes. So I
keep
love,
it up.
I'm so happy that you're that you're doing this and moving forward, and that you're not letting doubt or any of that, questioning stop you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty clear that this isn't the last time our paths will cross. So
Yes.
let's keep
Great.
going and fighting the good fight. And I will see you, hopefully in a few months.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye. Wow, Val, that was, I can't say it was fun. It was, it was insightful and inspiring and needed and all the things. I don't know any other adjectives to use, but I'm just thrilled that she said yes. She's a busy gal, and I want to make sure everyone knows that she travels around the world talking about this subject. So to get her on our podcast is not easy, and we thank her for saying yes, because this is a subject that's near and dear to our hearts, and we do not want it to be lip service. We want it to be a lasting thing for us. And admittedly, I don't know what that looks like yet. So it's like I'm still trying to figure out how to best help. But I know that I can't do that without talking to all the experts.
Right. And I think just being the common link, just a link, being able to, part of having so many resources is being able to provide them to people who need them. So, one of the ones that she gave us, constructionworkingminds.com would be a great place to go to if you have, questions, story to tell.
Yeah.
There are people out there who need to hear your story. And so we're thankful for all that Sally's doing. We're thankful for the inspiration that her brother Carson has provided. And
yes. Yeah, and that, like I said, she's making him proud, and you are as well. So, that's all you can do. You can't change the past, but you can create your own destiny, and you guys are both doing that. So, awesome. Thank you, Sally and Valerie, for sharing your guys' stories. And if you guys, you listeners, need help, please visit that website. There's also all sorts of resources online for suicide prevention and hotlines that are available to you. But please don't reach out to me, because I won't be able to help you. But I do want to be able to point you guys in the right direction, and it'll start with someone like Sally, and we'll keep going. So thanks a lot for listening to In the Zone. I am Jeremy, and this is still...
Zone.
And your name.
Oh, my...
She either forgets
I'm
her
still
name or the
Valerie.
name of the podcast. I tricked her, though. All right, bye, thanks.
Bye.
You've been listening to In the Zone with Jeremy and Valerie Owens. Be sure to subscribe to In the Zone and stay in the know with the best minds in the construction industry. To nominate an innovator or change maker in the construction industry, connect with your management peers, and stay up to date with construction industry news, be sure to visit usconstructionzone.com.